The court camera hummed softly, its lens fixed on Sarah Thompson. She stood before Judge Caprio, a figure of striking contrast against the drab courtroom walls. Her eyes, wide and seemingly innocent, swept across the faces in the gallery, pausing briefly on the stern gaze of the judge. There was a delicate quality to her, a carefully constructed image of vulnerability that had served her well in the past. Judge Caprio held up a tablet, its polished screen reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights, and for a fleeting moment, a tiny, distorted version of Sarah's own face flickered in her pupils. The judge's voice, though measured, cut through the quiet air. "Ms. Thompson," he began, his tone unwavering, "your testimony claims you were merely a bystander, a victim of circumstance in the incident. You stated you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught up in something entirely beyond your control. However, this footage tells a very different story." Sarah's carefully maintained composure faltered just for a split second. It was a micro-expression, a fleeting shadow of fear and a flicker of calculation that crossed her features before she smoothed them into a mask of polite confusion. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but for anyone looking closely, it was a tiny crack in her perfect facade. A low murmur rippled through the gallery as Judge Caprio pressed play on the tablet. The screen lit up, displaying a chaotic scene. The first few seconds of the video began to unfold, and with each passing frame, Sarah's carefully crafted narrative began to unravel. The footage showed her, not as a helpless victim, but actively engaged, her presence undeniable, her actions clear. The murmur grew louder, a collective gasp of understanding passing through the courtroom. It was a powerful moment, the kind that makes you realize how much can be revealed when the truth is laid bare. Sometimes, the truth speaks loudest when words fail. The video continued to play, each second peeling back another layer of her deception. The full extent of her involvement, the depth of her complicity, was still unfolding on the screen. The audience watched, captivated and stunned, wondering how deeply she had implicated herself, how far her actions had truly gone. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the camera and the indistinct sounds from the tablet. Before we continue with this unfolding drama, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring you more stories like Sarah's. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. We love hearing from all of you. Sarah grew up in the rarefied air of Washington, D.C., a city where power wasn't just discussed in hushed tones, but lived and breathed in every aspect of daily life. Her world was a gilded cage, built by her senator father, a man whose name opened doors and commanded respect. From an early age, she understood that her identity was inextricably linked to his political brand. Her childhood wasn't filled with neighborhood playgrounds and scraped knees, but rather with meticulously planned playdates at ambassadorial residences and charity galas where she was taught to smile, shake hands, and make polite conversation with people who held the keys to the nation. Her days were a carefully orchestrated ballet of privilege. Elite private schools, where classmates were the sons and daughters of diplomats, lobbyists, and other politicians, formed the backdrop of her education. Afternoons were often spent at exclusive clubs, learning tennis or horseback riding, skills deemed essential for a young woman of her standing. Evenings brought more events, sometimes small, intimate dinners with influential families, other times large, glittering affairs where she was expected to circulate, to network, to subtly advance her father's interests, with a charm offensive honed since childhood. The unspoken rules of this society were drilled into her. Maintain appearances at all costs, understand the delicate art of political maneuvering, and never, ever show weakness. Her family dynamics were complex, to say the least. Her mother, a socialite of considerable standing, was more concerned with maintaining their public image than with Sarah's emotional well-being. Her father, Senator Thompson, was a distant, towering figure. He loved her in his own way, but it was a love often overshadowed by his ambition. He viewed Sarah as an extension of himself, a living testament to his success, rather than an individual with her own dreams and desires. Conversations with him were often less about her day and more about how her actions reflected on the family name, how she could be an asset to his next campaign. There was a constant, unspoken pressure to be perfect, to never falter, to always embody the ideal senator's daughter. This constant scrutiny and the transactional nature of their relationship left her feeling perpetually under evaluation, never truly seen for who she was. It was within this environment that Sarah first encountered Mark, the young man she would later accuse. Their initial interactions were typical of the DC social scene. A chance meeting at a summer intern mixer, a mandatory event for anyone hoping to make inroads in the capital. Mark was bright, ambitious, but lacked the inherited sheen of privilege that Sarah took for granted. He was working his way through college, interning in a junior congressional office, a stark contrast to Sarah, who was attending the mixer out of a sense of obligation. From the start, there was a power imbalance. Sarah, with her effortless confidence and designer clothes, treated him with a casual dismissiveness, a subtle condescension that felt almost imperceptible to others, but cut deep into Mark. She would often make small, seemingly innocuous comments that hinted at her manipulative tendencies. Once, at a crowded reception, she accidentally spilled a drink on his resume, then offered a flippant apology, implying he should have been more careful. Another time, she forgot to include him in an important group email for a project they were both on, only to feign surprise and say, "Oh, darling, I just assumed you'd already seen it." These were not grand acts of malice, but rather tiny, calculated jabs, designed to assert her dominance and remind others of her inherent sense of entitlement. These small instances, barely noticeable to outsiders, were early glimpses into the true character that lay beneath the polished surface. They foreshadowed the deeper deception that would later unfold in Judge Caprio's courtroom. These tiny, calculated jabs, barely noticeable to outsiders, were early glimpses into the true character that lay beneath the polished surface. They foreshadowed the deeper deception that would later unfold in Judge Caprio's courtroom. The cracks in Sarah's character were not sudden. They appeared slowly, over years, like fine lines on an old painting. Her relationships, even with those she considered friends, often frayed at the edges. One particular incident stuck out to those who knew her well. It was at a University Debate Society event, where a less privileged student, Maria, had just won a prestigious scholarship. Sarah, instead of offering genuine congratulations, made a comment about how easy it must be to get noticed when you don't have a famous last name to live up to. She said it with a sweet smile, making it hard for anyone to call her out directly. Yet the sting of it was clear to everyone present, especially Maria. It was a subtle humiliation, a way to diminish someone else's achievement while pretending to be charming. Her father's broken promises also played a significant role in shaping her worldview. Senator Thompson, always busy with campaigns and political maneuvering, would frequently promise to attend her school events, only to cancel at the last minute. "Important Senate business, darling," he'd say, his voice apologetic but firm. Each cancellation chipped away at Sarah's trust, fostering a deep-seated resentment. She learned that promises from powerful people were often conditional, easily discarded when something more important came along. This taught her that rules, especially social ones, didn't always apply if you had enough influence or if you could simply explain them away. It created a belief that she was above certain expectations, a sense of entitlement that grew with every missed ballet recital or parent-teacher conference. This entitlement often manifested as outright abusive or neglectful behavior towards those around her. She treated service staff with an almost invisible condescension, a dismissive wave of the hand or an impatient sigh that spoke volumes without a single harsh word. Waiters, drivers, and personal assistants were simply extensions of her environment, there to serve her needs without question. One time, during a charity gala her mother hosted, Sarah deliberately lost a crucial guest list, knowing it would cause chaos for the event planner, a young woman named Chloe, who had dared to politely disagree with her earlier in the day. When confronted, Sarah just shrugged, saying she must have misplaced it, her eyes holding a faint, knowing glint. Chloe was nearly fired, and Sarah never apologized. She also had a habit of using her father's name to get her way. If she was caught speeding, a quick mention of Senator Thompson's daughter often led to a warning instead of a ticket. If a club was too exclusive, a call from her father's aide would magically open the doors. These small victories reinforced her belief in her own untouchability. She saw the world as a game where the rules bent for her. Her relationships with peers were equally strained. While she had a large circle of acquaintances, true friendships were rare. She often sabotaged peers for personal gain, especially if they threatened her social standing or academic achievements. In her senior year of high school, when a classmate, David, was nominated for a prestigious academic award that Sarah also coveted, she subtly spread rumors about his alleged plagiarism on an earlier project. The rumors were unfounded, but they were enough to cast a shadow of doubt, and David ultimately lost the award to Sarah. She never admitted her role, maintaining a facade of innocent surprise at his misfortune. The event that brought her before Judge Caprio was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of emotional erosion, a pattern of behavior where Sarah consistently placed her own desires and perceived grievances above the well-being of others. She had lived a life where consequences were often mitigated by her family's influence, where apologies were rarely necessary, and where the truth was a flexible concept, easily reshaped to suit her narrative. The courtroom drama was merely the inevitable outcome of a long, slow decay of character, a journey where privilege had shielded her from accountability for far too long until now. The video the judge was about to play would finally strip away that shield. The tensions surrounding Sarah's behavior, already simmering, now started to boil over. Arguments with her peers became more frequent and sharper. What used to be subtle digs or manipulative tactics now morphed into outright confrontations. Friends who had once tolerated her self-centeredness began to question her openly, tired of being used or dismissed. One evening, at a small gathering, a longtime acquaintance, fed up with Sarah's constant need to be the center of attention and her condescending remarks, finally snapped. He pointed out, in front of everyone, how Sarah always managed to turn every conversation back to herself, how nothing was ever her fault, and how she treated people like stepping stones. Sarah, unaccustomed to such direct challenges, first tried to laugh it off, then grew visibly angry, her face flushing, her voice rising to a shrill pitch as she defended herself, twisting the narrative to make him out to be the aggressor. The room grew silent, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Family members, too, started to voice their concerns, albeit more gently. Her mother, usually passive, expressed worry about Sarah's increasing isolation and her volatile moods. These conversations always ended in Sarah feeling attacked and misunderstood, further fueling her resentment. Her father's political career, already a demanding beast, began to face scrutiny. Whispers started circulating in the political circles about his daughter's incidents. While nothing concrete had yet surfaced to directly harm his public image, the quiet judgments of influential figures in their social circle became palpable. At charity events and political dinners, the polite smiles directed at Sarah often didn't reach their eyes. She could feel the shift, the subtle withdrawal, the way conversations would pause briefly when she approached. It created an atmosphere of constant, silent surveillance, making her feel like every move she made was being dissected and judged. This constant pressure pushed Sarah closer and closer to her emotional breaking point. She became increasingly paranoid, convinced that everyone was talking about her, plotting against her, or secretly judging her. Her defensiveness became extreme. Any minor criticism, any perceived slight would trigger an explosive reaction. She lashed out at those closest to her words cutting and often unfair, pushing away the very few people who still genuinely cared. Her sleep suffered, and she often found herself staring at the ceiling in the early hours, replaying conversations, dissecting glances, and fueling her own sense of victimhood. The oppressive atmosphere of Washington, D.C. itself seemed to reinforce her psychological burden. The humid summers felt heavier, the air thick and stifling, mirroring the weight on her chest. The cold, unforgiving architecture of the government buildings, the stark lines and imposing structures, seemed to loom over her, a constant reminder of the rigid expectations and the unforgiving nature of the city's elite. The constant hum of political gossip, ever present in the background of her life, now felt like a buzzing directly inside her head, amplifying her anxieties. The hushed tones of whispered criticisms, which she imagined behind every closed door, contributed to a feeling of being trapped and exposed, with nowhere to hide from the scrutinizing gaze of her world. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, with the fall getting closer and closer. The carefully constructed facade, once so effortless, now required immense effort to maintain, and it was beginning to crack under the strain. The breaking point finally arrived, not with a bang, but with a calculated, desperate maneuver that backfired spectacularly. Sarah, feeling cornered and increasingly isolated, decided to go on the offensive. She believed that by publicly discrediting her former friend, the one whose achievement she had so subtly undermined, she could regain control of her narrative and silence the whispers. The incident that led to her court appearance wasn't a sudden outburst, but a meticulously planned ambush during a high-profile charity gala, an event her father was co-hosting. She targeted her friend, Emily, during Emily's acceptance speech for a prestigious environmental award. Sarah had initially offered to help Emily with her speech, planting subtle suggestions that would later be twisted into accusations. On the night of the gala, as Emily spoke about her grassroots efforts and the challenges she overcame, Sarah, positioned strategically near a group of influential reporters, began to interject loudly, making exaggerated gestures of disbelief. She started accusing Emily of fabricating details, of exaggerating her impact, and even subtly implying that Emily had taken credit for other people's work. It was a vicious, unprovoked attack, delivered with a performative air of concern, as if she were reluctantly exposing a terrible truth. What Sarah didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Emily's brother, a budding documentary filmmaker, was recording the entire event for a portfolio piece. He had set up multiple cameras, including a discreet one that captured Sarah's face clearly as she launched her tirade. He wasn't just filming Emily. He was capturing the ambiance, the reactions, everything. This camera, almost an afterthought, became the silent witness. Another piece of footage came from the gala's own security cameras, which, unbeknownst to Sarah, had high-quality audio recording capabilities. These cameras were installed not just for security, but also to capture promotional material for future events, catching every word and every move. Sarah's carefully constructed facade shattered in that moment. Her voice, initially laced with false sympathy, quickly devolved into a bitter, resentful tone. The accusations grew wilder, more personal, revealing a deep-seated jealousy and anger that she had tried so hard to hide. She spoke with such conviction, such venom, that for a few terrifying minutes, some of the attendees actually looked at Emily with doubt. But then Emily, shocked but composed, simply held up her award, looked directly at Sarah and said, "Sarah, this isn't about me. This is about you." The crowd, sensing the shift, started to murmur. In her desperation to control the narrative, Sarah had overplayed her hand. She believed she could spin any situation, that her family's influence would always shield her. She truly thought she was untouchable, that her version of events would be the only one that mattered. As Emily's brother continued to film and the security cameras whirred silently, Sarah made her final, most desperate attempt to maintain her innocence. She pointed a shaking finger at Emily, her eyes wide with a manufactured outrage. "You're lying! You're always lying! You're trying to ruin me!" she shrieked, oblivious to the cameras, oblivious to the fact that her carefully cultivated image was crumbling around her. This raw, unfiltered outburst, captured from multiple angles, was the undeniable truth that Judge Caprio would later play in court. She had dug her own grave, not with a shovel, but with her own words and actions, believing she was burying someone else. The evidence was undeniable, clear for all to see. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's public outburst was a mixture of stunned silence and nervous whispers. Some of her father's political allies quickly distanced themselves, their faces a mask of polite discomfort. Others, particularly those Emily had helped through her community work, found a new courage. They began sharing their own stories of Sarah's petty cruelties, her condescension, and her manipulation. The carefully constructed wall of silence that had protected Sarah for so long began to crumble, brick by brick. The incident at the gala, captured so vividly, became the catalyst. Back in the courtroom, the video footage played on, filling the silence. The raw, unfiltered outburst, Sarah's shaking finger, her desperate shriek of, "You're lying! You're always lying! You're trying to ruin me!" echoed through the room. It was undeniable. The judge watched, his expression unreadable, as the final frames faded to black. He then looked directly at Sarah, who stood pale and deflated, her carefully cultivated innocence shattered. Judge Caprio cleared his throat, his voice firm and clear. "Ms. Thompson," he began, "the evidence presented, specifically this video, unequivocally contradicts your testimony. It shows not a victim, but an aggressor. It shows not a bystander, but an orchestrator of malice." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Your attempts to discredit Ms. Emily, to undermine her character and her achievements, were not only unfounded, but were also a deliberate act of slander." The judge's final verdict was swift and decisive. He ordered Sarah to pay a substantial sum in damages to Emily, a sum far greater than a typical defamation case. reflecting the deliberate cruelty and public nature of her actions. More significantly, he mandated that Sarah complete a rigorous program of community service, working directly with the very communities Emily served to understand the impact of her privilege and her words. He also issued a public reprimand, a stinging condemnation that would follow Sarah for years, effectively tarnishing her name and, by extension, casting a long shadow over her father's political career. The senator, who had watched the proceedings from the back of the courtroom, left without a word, his face etched with defeat. The long-term repercussions for Sarah were profound. Many of her former friends, who had tolerated her behavior out of convenience or fear, now openly avoided her. Invitations to exclusive events stopped coming. The social currency she had always relied on evaporated. Her father, reeling from the public fallout, became even more distant, his political aspirations severely damaged. Sarah was left to confront a reality where her name no longer opened doors, but instead closed them. In the end, the story was a stark reminder of the fragility of privilege when confronted with undeniable truth. Sarah's upbringing had instilled in her a dangerous belief that rules didn't apply, that consequences were for other people. But the truth, captured by an unassuming camera and presented by a judge who valued justice above status, proved to be an unyielding force. It exposed the rot beneath the polished surface, showing that even the most powerful facades can crumble under the weight of their own deception. Sarah's journey from entitled daughter to publicly disgraced individual served as a powerful, if tragic, lesson in accountability, leaving everyone to ponder the complex interplay of power, truth, and the ultimate price of unchecked arrogance.